art history here at NYU through the Department of Art History, where we have a specialty program called Urban Design and Architecture Studies, which is how we got involved in this event here today. And so I'd like to welcome all of you here. This, of course, is our illustrious, does not the illustrious Department of Art History. We would have welcomed you to our smaller, darker lecture hall over on the other side of the square, but there was such a great interest in this event that we worked with the law school to acquire this room for tonight, and I'm going to reschedule all my classes for this room in the future. But I'm definitely delighted to see a lot of familiar and new faces out here tonight. And I'm delighted to be working here with some partnership. In particular, I'd like to thank Harry and Rezoning, the Society for Historic Preservation. And also Adrian Untermeyer from the Historic Districts Council. Now Adrian is kind of the link here. He was a student in our department. And so when he approached me over the summer to ask if we would like to co-sponsor this event, we were delighted to work with the Historic Districts Council, the Historic Society, and all the groups that are here tonight to work on promoting this discourse, this dialogue, right, and the discussion of where we are today in terms of policy, design, preservation, activism here in New York City. So I'm really looking forward to a very interesting evening tonight, as I'm sure all of you are as well. Let's say a few words about us and who we are. Here at NYU, there are a lot of people thinking about architecture and urbanism across disciplines. Interdisciplinarity, of course, is the kind of buzzword, but it's true. When we think about urbanism, here we have people in the Wagner School, in policy and planning, in sociology, in anthropology, and in our history. You might wonder why our history would be coming to the table here. But again, I imagine many of you probably came into your interest in architecture and built environment maybe through art history, through aesthetics. There's a long tradition, I think, in our field, in my field, of thinking about the relationship of the built environment to its context, to the full kind of, especially today, the social, the economic, the political ramifications of the built form, relative to urbanism, to city planning. And in our department, in our history department, as I say, we promote this with our students, and I'm delighted again, is the word of the evening, to see quite a few of our students and faculty here in the audience tonight. We promote through our undergraduate program, the Urban Design and Architecture Studies program, which looks at, of course, architectural history, but history of urbanism, urban planning, historic preservation, contextual development, a whole range of kind of topics. And I'm happy to say a great number of our students come to New York because they want to be engaged in the city. And many of them are working, interning, and getting jobs, and going to graduate schools here in the city, and thinking deeply about issues of development, preservation, community preservation, and many ways to do that. So I hope that, in fact, you all came in. We met several of our students at the front desk tonight. They were here to greet you. I think if you work in this field, you'll meet students and former students of ours throughout the city, and we're quite proud of that. We also have a graduate program that is through the Global Network at NYU London, called the MA in Historical and Sustainable Architecture, which focuses on historic preservation and adaptive reuse strategies in the UK. We train mostly North Americans who then learn the great kind of creativity that abounds in the UK and bring back a lot of those ideas to their home cities, whether it's New York, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Detroit, Los Angeles, Phoenix, or places like that where students are participating themselves in a burgeoning preservation and community preservation movement across the nation. So we like to think that we're really active in helping promote that next generation of preservationists and really engage and care deeply about the built environment and its relationship to the things that we care about in our community, sustainability, affordability, and some issues that we're about tonight. So enough about me and enough about us. Again, I welcome you here to NYU, and again, happy to see all of you here. I look forward. I hope, I know Harry and I talked about we're hoping this can become part of the beginning, maybe something larger to bring these groups together across academia, activism, building, design together to promote this kind of discourse of these issues today. So welcome, thank you for coming. And let me turn it over to Harry Bovins, British Society for Historic Preservation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm Harry Bovins from the Greenberg Society for Historic Preservation. We're a membership nonprofit organization that works to preserve the cultural and architectural heritage of Greenwich Village, NoHo, and the East Village. And I'm really honored to be here tonight with all the panelists that we're going to hear from shortly. In the aftermath of ZQA and MIH and the various developments and proposals that are going across the city and the intense community efforts to often combat those proposals, I have been privy to see that across this diverse city of all the unique strengths that each community has, we seem to have a lot in common. And so I'm hopeful that in the course of sharing in public together of the unique attributes of each community, as well as the vision that the communities have proposed themselves, we will be able to have a different method of planning in the city that's not a top-down approach where plans from the mayor speed through while community rezoning plans are on the table for years sometimes, as we will hear today. So I don't want to take up much of the time. I know you want to hear from the speakers, so I will announce and introduce in order of their speaking with one slight change. And there'll be a time for a question and answer after. And we know that the speakers have our timekeeper and that our questions will be focused from the crowd after. So tonight, starting, the speakers will go from the north to south, and I'm going to introduce it otherwise. So from the Coalition to Protect Chinatown in the Lower East Side, we have Jay Fong. From Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, we have Andrew Berman. From the East River 50s Alliance, we have Gail Wasserman. From Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts, we have Rachel Levy. From Landmark West, Sean Corsandi. And from Save Harlem Now, Val Bradley and Michael Henry Adams. And from Inwood Preservation, Maggie Clark, and Northern Manhattan Not For Sale, Graham Serrallo. And we're going to start from the north, and with one slight change. One of our presenters from Save Harlem Now is en route, so we're just going to let them go at the end then, as well as a slight change to accommodate them coming up late. So might have heard about the recent ongoings in Inwood and Northern Manhattan regarding the first private MIH rezoning. So let's, without further ado, hear from our first speakers, and then we'll just go down the line. Thank you.
Hi. So this, I hope this is the right thing it's showing. I can't tell. Let's go out. There we go. So this iconic structure here, this is a picture of what might have been. And it's what galvanized all of us together. You can see Inwood is very, very small compared to this building, and our beautiful parks, Fort Tryon and Inwood Hill Park, are next to it. And Fort Tryon is an Olmsted Park. It's landmarked and so forth. This is how we formed Inwood Preservation after an EDC meeting. And it was in February of 2016 we got together. In 2 days we had 32 members on Facebook, and now we're about 411. So, and Northern Manhattan is Not For Sale also came along shortly after we started. And so Inwood Preservation's purpose, as originally stated, slightly changed. Where we want to preserve the character of the Inwood neighborhood, of affordable low-rise apartment housing, small businesses, large public parks, and to uphold good quality of life, environmental value, and a strong community. And Northern Manhattan is Not For Sale is dedicated to ensuring that Inwood and Washington Heights remain affordable, working middle-class communities and their rich, vibrant culture protected for generations to come. Now, this Sherman Plaza proposal, which started, I don't know exactly when it started, but it was on Facebook that most of us saw this picture that I showed you originally. Notice how tall this building is compared to the cloisters. Are you familiar with the cloisters? It's on top of a hill and it's tall, and this thing would have been bigger, taller than the cloisters, and look how massive the thing was. That was the original 27 stories. Then a number of us, including the borough president, worked on getting it shorter. We got it down to 18 which is the lower right picture. But the whole problem with this was that they wanted to do spot upzoning to R8X and R9A. And this would have been a terrible precedent, and we were all fighting it for that point. And we wanted to have, we basically ended up with at this point, and we're getting ahead of myself, that the original proposal by the developers is the other one, the other image on the left lower part. And that would be what they could build as of right, a 10-story building. So, why we fought Sherman Plaza?
Hi, I'm Greg from Harlem Now. It's not for sale. I'm just going to cover really quickly the affordability argument because that's what Northern Manhattan It's Not For Sale was actually formed in response to the NIH endeavor. So you'll hear a lot about how this project was 50% affordable, and a lot of the talking points that the mayor and the media are using now are, oh, you could have had 50% affordability, now you have nothing. That is not the entire story. And it's very effective. I had to reconvince my mother why we fought this. So you can see here, I won't harp too much on this, but you can see that there were some loopholes for the developer to actually change the affordability allocation. So that was a big thing for us, reason why we fought it. Maggie already mentioned spot rezonings, and we're also incredibly concerned about neighborhood tenant harassment, which I'll talk a little bit more about.
And so, you know, we were fighting the fact that the infrastructure in upper Manhattan, where we are, is between 60 and 100 years old. We have failures all the time. Broadway is the only through street, and you know, most of the traffic has to go on Broadway. And adding a massive building like this right on Broadway was going to cause, I argue that the city council gridlock in Inwood. This would encourage landlords in the surrounding neighborhood area to deregulate apartments. Of course, it was out of context with the rest of the neighborhood. You could see that from the first. And, you know, it ended up that they wanted to double the FAR. And there'd be negative effects on Fort Tryon Park, as well as being able to see Fort Tryon Park, and destruction of the historic Packard building, which was what this building was, or is at this point. And the developer didn't even submit an environmental impact statement for the community board to review.
So I just want to finish up the second half of this by talking about what we did to stop it, which I think is what a lot of people want to know. So is everybody familiar with the ULURP? That's the review process that the city does. So basically, one of the most important things is to engage in every step of the ULURP. From the CB12 review, so the first CB12 meeting, people came out, opposed it, the public opposed it 300-0. Okay, so that, and the CB12 eventually opposed that too. After it was renegotiated, something interesting happened. CB12 decided on a general meeting at 10 p.m. to review the new proposal and vote on it without alerting the public. Obviously, this caused quite a stir in the neighborhood.
Yeah, just one.
Oh, thank you. So as you can see, we organized a protest at the next CB12 meeting because this is actually, it gets a little confusing, but tied into the Inwood Rezoning plan, which is a different story, but they're kind of related. As you can see, we had a silent protest, which quickly turned very unsilent. And if you look for it on the internet, you could find it. The neighborhood really rose up in objection. CB12 agreed to review the process again. At the town, so this is from the town hall meeting where we were all actually opposing the project. So that was when the borough president renegotiated. So again, we were all there. About how many people? You think 25 people spoke in opposition. So that was the thing with this project, is that over and over again, everybody opposed to it. Supporters, or so-called supporters, didn't show up until the very end.
Yep.
Technical difficulties. So the big fight was what we call the March to Save Inwood. So we united, what made our organization, our coalition so successful successful. We united a traditionally very divided community. And we had about 300 people show up to oppose Chairman Plaza. It got actually kind of hairy when some supporters charged the mic and tried to stop our speakers from speaking. We decided to march at that point, and we marched up to St. Jude. It was very dramatic, where the priest of St. Jude gave a talk. So that was very contentious. It really did a lot to pressure the councilman Adonis Rodriguez to rethink his support of the project, but we weren't done yet. We actually had to have a second rally, and you see that right here, where Adonis Rodriguez was actually pressured to say that he's going to vote no against Chairman Plaza. And we've been dealing with the blowback from this, and a lot of it comes from the mayor and the press. So last but not least, this is a picture of the Inwood rezoning. This is Inwood NYC rezoning. As you can see, they're rezoning the far east side of Inwood. There have been a lot of problems with this. The affordability has not been discussed adequately. There's been too few stakeholders have not been at the table. We need to get to the table. So this is an ongoing process. We're not totally opposed to it, but it's an ongoing battle. And this just gives you an idea of some of what we want. So preservation of the housing stock, contextual zoning, and certain the majority of wood, protections for tenants, keep affordability, environmental justice, and new infrastructure. And with that, I will say goodbye.
About the petition during your question and answer.
Oh, the Packard building? Yeah, sure. Well, there's the historic picture again. Yeah, so the Packard building was an Albert Kahn building. Albert Kahn was a very famous, I'm sorry, I'm thinking one more second. Albert Kahn was a very famous industrial architect. So this is actually, although people look at this and say, oh, it's just a parking garage, it's actually something that should be considered landmarked. So that's another preservationists in our area are very concerned about this. Thank you.
So as I said, we're going to wait for Harlem Now and move on to the next speaker. So I'm going to go look at the great presentation. We will save it for the culmination. Rachel, yeah, sorry, thank you. Rachel from Friends of the Upper East Side Historic District.
dedicated to preserving the architectural legacy, livability, and sense of place at the Upper East Side. In addition to monitoring the Upper East Side's 7 historic districts and 128 individual landmarks, Friends has been a leader in successful efforts to improve the zoning laws governing the area's avenues and residential side streets. We were instrumental in achieving contextual zoning for much of the neighborhood 30 years ago. You can see an early map here. In 1982, our founding president, Alina Rosenthal, wrote the following in a letter to the chairman of the City Planning Commission. And I'm just going to read this quote. The present R8 zoning allows the proliferation of assorted needles, slivers, splinters, and other such skyward-oriented structures, which, if unchecked, will totally destroy New York City's mid-block residential streetscape. And remarkably, these are many of the same issues we continue to be concerned about today. So that's why we engaged GVSHP planning to undertake a comprehensive study focusing on ways we can preserve the character of the Upper East Side. In 2015, we released the Upper East Side, a framework for the future of 5 neighborhoods, available for info on our website. A planning report report that identifies specific development risks threatening community integrity in the wake of inappropriately scaled, poorly sited, and non-contextual high-density development on the horizon as the opening of the Second Avenue subway approaches. I want to underscore for just a moment that Friends supports smart growth in New York City, but we recognize that it takes comprehensive planning, not piecemeal development that fails to take into account the cumulative impact on character of our neighborhoods. The impact on livability, schools, open space, affordable housing, and historic resources, all the things that define our neighborhoods. So the study area for our report covered everything from East 59th to East 110th Streets, from Central Park to the East River. This is a very large area that encompasses 5 distinct neighborhoods: the Upper East Side and Carnegie Hill bordering 5th Avenue to 3rd Avenue, East Harlem to the north, and Yorkville and Lenox Hill to the east. The resulting report identifies the elements that contribute to a sense of place and factors in current zoning which support the individual character of each of these neighborhoods. It also examines specific development risks that threaten community integrity, and finally identifies strategies that might be implemented to balance continued growth with preservation for the future quality of the urban environment. So the first several sections of the study itself are really somewhat diagnostic, and they kind of put into planning language many of the facets of these neighborhoods which we knew instinctively. And then the second portion makes a number of recommendations, which you see summarized here, outlining a possible agenda for advocacy by us and our other neighborhood stakeholders. So I just want to go into detail on a few of our findings while I touch on this rather ambitious list of recommendations. So I mentioned contextual zoning just briefly, but I have to come back to it because it's a major factor in the Upper East Side zoning. 64% of all parcels on the Upper East Side are contextually zoned. And those are the areas that you see in light pink on the map. The zoning here attempts to reinforce the qualities of the existing streetscape in its regulation of the form and bulk of new buildings. Of residential lots, 60% are zoned R8B. This is one of the most common contextual districts, which is your typical mid-block row house type of zoning. So within R8B districts, new buildings should approximate the height and bulk of the row house block. This means a base of up to 60 feet and a max height of 75 feet, so about 6 stories overall. R8B is a dominant residential zoning by a wide margin on the Upper East Side, with higher density districts mapped along the avenues. This has created a kind of hills and valleys pattern, which is evident on the map where the taller avenues are in pink and the larger contextual, lower density areas are in yellow. This hills and valleys paradigm is characteristic of this area and we believe it should be protected and maintained. Mid-block retail is another defining characteristic. Ground floor commercial use of mid-block buildings are mostly small businesses which ensure a diversity of services for residents. We recommend activating their retail frontages to ensure that small businesses thrive. It may come as a surprise, but we are especially starved for parks and open space on the Upper East Side. Parks and open space account for only 1% of land use in the area, and many spaces are poorly maintained and underutilized POPs or privately owned public spaces. The Upper East Side is home to 73 POPs, more than any other residential neighborhood, and we recommend a new program to incentivize upgrades, enforce regulation, and review redesign of these spaces. We recently highlighted this issue at Friends by presenting an award last March to one outstanding POPs in our neighborhood, and we're now completing a survey of all the POPs in our area in coordination with the borough president and our council member. Eastern neighborhoods of the study area also contain a broad range of affordable housing stock. 38% of all buildings in the study area contain affordable units, seen in green on the map. In the last 7 years, Community 48, which is our area, saw a net loss of 26% of affordable units. Of the red stabilized units lost, 70% were east of 3rd Avenue. The loss of affordability in this area is really alarming, and we must ensure the preservation of existing affordable units, as well as that new development replaces one-for-one any units lost to redevelopment and the permanent affordability of new units. Of course, we also have 2nd Avenue, which is at a critical juncture with the incoming subway and increased development pressures in the area. We recommend that DCP launch a community-based planning process around the station areas so development doesn't proceed in a piecemeal fashion. Today, over 90% of buildings on 2nd Avenue are 210 feet tall or less, and the average building height on 2nd Avenue is only 83 feet, which is around 6 to 8 stories. There are just 2 buildings that are taller than 400 feet, which you see here. But overall, about 90% of parcels along Second Avenue are underbuilt under existing zoning. And the dominant context looks a lot like the picture you see on the left, with tenement buildings lining the avenue interspersed with some taller buildings. This means that there's a great deal of as-of right development potential on the corridor, leaving it vulnerable to radically upscale proposals.
Those buildings are just coming down.
They were, yes, they're now development sites. So the numerous vacant and underbuilt properties along the avenue also suggest that parcels are being assembled as large development sites, as this site was. And the lack of limits on zoning lot mergers also paved the way for the march of super talls into this neighborhood. These are just a handful of the developments that we know about. Not pictured as another site where zoning lot mergers will allow for a 1,000-foot building on the corner of 60th Street and Lexington Avenue. Because so much of Second Avenue is underbuilt, in addition to 3rd, 1st, and York Avenues, and has extremely permissive zoning, this eastern portion of the neighborhood is extremely vulnerable to overdevelopment. As a key piece of our recommendations, we're working toward contextual rezoning of our avenues with a height cap at 210 feet. And we support efforts to limit zoning lot mergers and increase transparency when zoning lot mergers do occur. We are still at the very early stages of assembling a team to take on a contextual rezoning of the eastern avenues, and we'll be fine-tuning a proposal that allows for smart growth to occur on the avenues with aims to maintain the character of the neighborhood. Informal conversations with residents and the community so far have shown a lot of support for any measures that would discourage the creep of super towers into our neighborhoods. The community board has also endorsed the concept of a 210-foot height limit, and we continue to build support for this initiative. Please feel free to check out full details of the report on our website.
Good evening. Thank you, Harry. I'm Sean Coseno, Plan Request and Advocacy Director. And our organization covers, we're entering our 4th decade. We cover a neighborhood that's approximately 1.9 square miles. And it's also the 2nd densest neighborhood in the United States. We're considered a sleepy area. We're bookended by 2 scenic landmarks, Riverside Park and Central Park. And there's a defensive line of iconic apartment buildings on either edge of us, Riverside Drive, Central Park West, in between those little chains and rings of stooped brownstones. You'll see that we're anything but sleepy. This first slide shows some upcoming development. In the foreground, this is new development coming out of Fordham University. That's all part of their urban renewal super block. And in the distance, this is 2 redevelopment sites of former synagogues that I'll show you in a moment. In 2007, we did a proposal or a study with WXY Architects, Claire Weiss, and the idea was looking at what are the potential futures of Central Park West, what are the soft sites, what institutions might be at risk, and who might want to try to develop a tower to mar our iconic skyline. And at this time, in 2007, nobody perceived the recalibrations of opportunity costs for building, coupled with the new construction technologies that would come to bear. This site that you're looking at now is on West 66th Street. It was formerly the home of Congregation Halloween, and adjacent to it were 3 small buildings that were used to store sets for ABC soap operas that no longer exist. So those 4 sites are the green site right now. Through combining those 4 lots, Xtel and Megalith partnered, and they used air rights transfers from the building behind it and adjacent to individual landmark First Battery Armory. And they can, as of right, build a 70-story tower without any community board input. And beyond that, what's best is if they add inclusionary housing, that can be over 84 stories. This is just one potential future. Since we've done these, the Jewish Guild for the Blind, which you're seeing just in the distance behind it, has since actually sold this building, although it's not on public record, so this can be even taller. With this initial rendering, this could already send shadows past 72nd Street. So why are we against ZQA? Besides the fact that we feel it's not needed, we also feel that there's no public benefit, there's not guaranteed public housing. It's also because it's a citywide endeavor, and the Upper West Side has already had major transformations. It's already had a series of rebirths. That started off as farmland that's been transformed through speculative development into row houses, and then it's also suffered greatly under urban renewal. So we've learned a lot from our lessons, and we're looking at ways that we try to protect that. If you come to the Upper West Side, there are actually 12 historic districts or historic district extensions. Some of them are very small, you'll see on the far right. Some are very large, the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. But this is one layer of protection for the built environment. We also have contextual zoning. Blue is the Lincoln Square Special Zoning District, and everything that's in red is a contextual zoning area. So it's more than half of the stock of the Upper West Side. But when you mix that with the bump ups that can happen through ZQA, it's like mixing ammonia and bleach. So where does the confluence of these two come to pass, and how do they work with each other? If you think about the Upper West Side, some of the most iconic things are Broadway. One intersection will be 79th and Broadway, and that's at the confluence here of 5 distinct historic districts, but actually the gray area that's in the middle are carve-outs. So among those carve-outs is this orange block of buildings, which you'll recognize more properly as Zabor's. In every sense of the word, it's a civic landmark, but it's not protected, and for all intents and purposes, city planning, it's underbuilt. Similarly, cat-a-corner from that is another civic landmark, and it's also recognized as the place that Banksy chose to leave his mark on the Upper West Side. Again, 2 buildings with civic aptitude, but no landmarking protections. Directly adjacent those are 3 sites that just also so happen to be development sites right now. So the verge of Broadway, one of the most iconic intersections of the Upper West Side, is all about to change our midst. These proposals range from initially a 16-story rendering on the left, replacing the building on the right, to its new 19-story iteration on the scaffolding. The Verizon building, also formerly H&H Bagels, which as of right can be, because of contextual zoning, more than twice the height and even taller if they include affordable housing. Similarly, the Essential Oils building, again, 4 times as tall before addition of ZQA. So when you zoom out and look at the edge of Broadway, everything that's blue is a historic district or individual landmark. You're seeing a serrated edge. On the east side of Broadway and the Upper West Side, there are only 3 landmark buildings. And this brings to bear an earlier question from last year when the historic district that was just expanded had a carve-out at the last moment. We call it the de Blasio diet, where they cut out all the buildings along Broadway. And part of that is hand-in-hand with this new zoning initiative. So zoning is now trumping landmark. All these sites that you're looking at that are black along the Broadway corridor are less than 6 stories. So that means they're already at less than half of their potential. What you're not also noticing is that this boundary of the historic district is leaving a lot of FAR on the table that could easily be joined and moved through zoning law mergers. So Broadway is, in fact, on the potential cusp of explosion. The reason why we have contextual zoning in these areas is because the aerial towers got built by sucking up zoning rights and actually transferring them over zoning districts. So now these people who marred the landscape in many ways in the skyscape now have protected views. Some of the other issues that we're looking at, in particular that we're seeing at risk, are as of right developments on nonprofit sites. One issue is the 1922 congregation shares a deck by Summerfield and Steckler. This congregation is having poor finances and a shrinking congregation membership. If you look at this building from a distance, imagine it gone. As of right, they could build a 14-story residential building, but because they're putting the community use back in, they get a 20% bonus. So not only does the community get all the traffic of the remaining congregation, they get the traffic and impact of the 14 stories of residential. So you can build larger than your neighbors. And this is a touch-up of a rendering we just saw. It's from a Xerox that they tried to hew a little bit. But this is what their plan is, and there is no zoning protection for this building. Similarly, we've already lost Lincoln Square Synagogue. That's the building on the left. It's potentially going to be a 660-foot story building that's under construction now. It'll have unobstructed views of both Central Park due to its siting and Hudson River. And we've already lost Congregation Halloween. This was in that first slide that I showed you, or the early slides with that 80-foot strip town. So when you're looking at the building, that's these two tall glass buildings in the distance. So we're also looking at issues of outdated zoning. Although we have these large historic districts, just outside that, a couple of blocks, you'll see, again, rows of iconic row houses. Had they been a few blocks away, they'd be in a district. Here, although they're intact, under current zoning, since it's not protected under contextual means, you can just obliterate that and build up, marring the syncopation and the continuity of the road. What's more likely is that you'll assemble a few of these. Similarly, on 95th Street, the same thing can happen. And my favorite, on 96th, you can even break the street wall and build up, but you get a bonus as well zoning for quality and affordability. My last project I want to show you is on the northern side of the Upper West Side Central Park West Limit. These 3 row houses, 15, 17, and 19 West 96th Street, have numerous violations on them. They've been rat infested. There have been issues with construction failures and demolition issues for safety for the people working on it. And if you take that, zoom out, there's been a proposal to build a large tower on that site. It's taller than everything around it. What you'll notice in the zoning district is that 55% of the zoning is below a 150-foot limit. Anything beyond that can stretch and go as high as it wants. This developer is using a community facility bonus, so there's no named user, there's no one identified, there's no standards for what this space should be. These are the tightest, smallest 8-foot ceiling height spaces, and they can be vacant forever. It's just increasing the base of the building so that people can have apartments with better views above it. So, zooming out from Central Park West, that first building to the right was an earlier battle this past year. That's the former First Church of Christ Scientists by Carrera Hastings. If they did a zoning law merger and transferred the unused air rights from this church through the co-op right behind it, at no cost to the co-op, their potential is enormous. Using this as just very small standards, packing the footage as low to the bottom as possible, you can have a 50-story apartment building, two deep blocks off of Central Park West. Those are some of the things we're looking at. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, yeah? Yes. Okay. I'm on the leadership committee of the organization, and I'm also been responsible basically for the volunteerism, and I'm also the national cheerleader for the organization. The East River 50s Alliance, ERPA, is a nonprofit 501c4 corporation founded in 2015 by East River 50s residents, so cooperatives and condominiums to reform New York City zoning laws to prevent out-of-scale development in their neighborhood. Currently, a 1,000-foot mega tower is planned by the Bauhaus Group on East 57th Street between First Avenue and Sutton Place. Pencil towers buildings may be proposed by other developers on soft sites in the Sutton Place area. ERFA is a community-led grassroots organization that has the support of many elected officials. 4 elected officials, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, council members Ben Kalos and Dan Garodnick, and State Senator Liz Kruger, have signed on to the rezoning pre-application that we have filed with the Department of City Planning. ERFA's efforts are also supported by Congressmember Caroline Maloney and Assemblyman Dan Force. Roughly 30 neighborhood buildings have formally joined ERFA, and more than at least 2,000 people have joined the alliance as individuals. The geography of the Sutton Place community lends itself to some seclusion. Found on the east side by the FDR Drive and the East River, and on the north by the 59th Street Bridge, our historic neighborhood is also bracketed around 2 public parks, one at 57th Street, the other at 53rd Street. Compared to many other neighborhoods in the city, the East River 50s is rather small. It's not particularly trendy in any way. Instead, it is the kind of community where people move in, raise their children, and stay. Sort of a strollers to walkers community. Our community is generally low-rise and residential. The few businesses in the area which serve, The few commercial businesses in the area that are there to serve the community. One of the things that characterizes our neighborhood is that we do not have the tall buildings of Midtown. The buildings on the east side of Sutton Place are strung together by private communal gardens that back onto the river. We really do have some of the loveliest architecture in the city. We are all here today because although each of our neighborhoods is different, we have one thing in common. We are all a victim of hyper and inappropriate development plans. Although New York is a city whose landscape continues to change, most agree that today we are seeing an overabundance of outsized, unneeded, and unwanted development projects. Local communities like ours deserve to have a say in what their neighborhood will look like, both now and in the future. Good development that keeps our community unique and livable, with access to green and open space, is possible. The reason we decided to take action and create our own zoning plan was the threat of that mega tower. It would be completely out of context, but sadly perfectly legal, as long as our neighborhood retains its current zoning with no height caps. The specter of our neighborhood becoming another Midtown was frankly frightening, and we were in a race to make that change before the company was able to start building it as of right. We were able to quickly mobilize community members in many of the area and many of the neighborhood and assemble some activists who had experience in both fighting City Hall and working on development concerns. From there, we strategized our opinions and our options and decided on the rezoning plan as the only true and lasting solution to the problem. Our outdated zoning allowed outsized developments, not only at the proposed site, but at the potential soft sites in the neighborhood that are vulnerable to such speculative projects. Since we were lucky enough to have some people in the community who had worked on urban planning issues, we used their expertise to help us decide on the type of plan we needed. IRFA's response has been to commission lawyers, planners, land use experts to prepare and submit a proposal to the New York Department of City Planning to rezone the East River 50s by creating a new zoning district. This new zoning district, to be designated R10A2, would replace the outdated existing R10 district, which has no height limits on residential development. The plan has been formally submitted to the Department of City Planning and is currently in the pre-ruler process. I'm not quite sure where we are because I can't see all of it, but we'll get there. There we go. What? I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. The plan has been formally submitted to the Department of City Planning and is currently in the pre-ruler process. I believe we're up to the slides that should say this shows what could happen to the neighborhood under the current RD zoning. There's a lot of potential for outer-scale buildings on soft sites. Our plan as depicted in this slide, proposes a contextual district that would prevent mega towers through height limits and would include incentives for affordable housing construction and design controls for wide buildings. While IRFA expects that its proposal will evolve through the review process, here are current details. The new R10A district proposed by IRFA will allow for height limits of 210 feet for buildings with frontage on narrow streets and 235 feet for buildings with frontage on wider streets. The base FAR for residential on community facility buildings would remain at 10.0, unchanged from the current R10 zoning. IRFA's proposal would also create facade articulation requirements in the newly created R10A district. This would create an environment at the street level that is friendly, safe, and an integrated part of the neighborhood in which it would be built. In our rezoning plan, in order to reduce the potential development of long, flat, unfriendly, and inappropriate facades, a regulation would be written to require facade articulation at various levels. IRFA proposes to make the newly created R10A2 district an inclusionary housing designated area, thus providing an incentive for the voluntary construction of affordable housing. In exchange for reserving 20% of total units for people earning at or below 80% of the area median income, developers would receive a 3.0 FAR bonus and an increased height limit to accommodate the additional FAR. The rezoning would protect the East River 50s community from excessively tall buildings. No megatower could be developed within the area extending roughly from 52nd to 59th Street east of First Avenue. The new zoning has the potential to quadruple the amount of affordable housing built as part of a new development in the neighborhood as compared to the status quo zoning. Oh, sorry. I can't believe that happened. I apologize. Look at the pretty picture. Got it?
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew Berman from the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. For those of you who don't know us, we're a community-based organization. We fight for zoning protections, landmark protections in our neighborhood against out-of-scale development. Since our creation in 1980, we've gotten about 1,100 buildings in our neighborhood landmarked on top of the 3,000 or so that were already landmarked, and nearly 100 blocks of our neighborhood contextually rezoned. In spite of what some of our detractors would like to portray us as, we're not opposed to any and all new development in our neighborhood. We think it should be in character, and we think it should take place in the right places and in the right way. And along those lines, we've actually been pushing a proposal for a rezoning of our area that currently has pretty bad zoning, which we actually thought we would get a warm reception from this administration because it was actually really tailored to what they say are their priorities: affordable housing, working with the community, neighborhood context. I think most people in this room won't be shocked to hear we've had nothing but adamant resistance from the administration to this proposal. And in fact, they've pushed very hard to keep in place our non-contextual luxury condo only zoning that we currently have. So let me give you some details on the story here. So the area that we're trying to get rezoned is the University Place Broadway corridor, which you can see in this image here. The purple are historic districts. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong side. So the purple is the historic districts that we have. People tend to think that the village is entirely protected by landmark protections. It's not. As you can see by this area that's outlined in red, there is no landmark protections, and it actually has some pretty bad zoning, which I'll go through the particulars of. The administration would have you believe that this is an area where zoning that allows or encourages 300-foot tall towers is appropriate. Let me show you what some of that landscape looks like. We certainly have some denser buildings, as you can see on the side, usually a maximum of about 12 stories. We also have a lot of low-scale buildings, some as low as 1 or 2 stories, a lot of 4- or 5-story buildings in this area. As you can see here, as we sort of scroll through, these are tremendously, quote-unquote, underbuilt under the existing zoning, and could easily get 300-foot tall towers placed on where they now currently are. And in fact, if you look at the existing zoning that we have there, there's 3 zoning districts. They have, in one case, up to 6.5 FAR, floor area ratio, meaning the ratio of the number of square feet you can build is compared to the size of your lot, which of course in a non-contextual district like this can be increased by acquiring air rights from neighboring properties. You get to build bigger if you include what are called community facilities, which in our case are frequently dormitories. You can actually also build bigger by including a plaza, which nobody really wants or needs. Let me show you the incredible way that the current zoning works. It doesn't put any height limits in place. It just creates this ratio of a sort of very, very slight and gradual setback going up from a base. So this is a study we did showing a site on the corner of 12th Street and University Place. And within these two pyramids, these are the two versions that the existing zoning allows. This shows you the space within which you can build a building. You'll notice that in the version on one side it goes up to 740 feet, on the other side 566 feet. Now you wouldn't get a building that tall in all likelihood because the uppermost portion of that envelope that you can build within is incredibly narrow, but it's very, very realistic to build within the sort of thicker, denser part of the lower part of that pyramid that the zoning allows you to build in. And in fact, that's exactly what we're getting on the side of what used to be Baltimore Lanes on University 12th Street. Here is an image of what, before the architectural renderings were released, what we knew the zoning would allow and what indications showed was going to be built on that site. This is it from a few different angles. Again, the feedback we've gotten from the administration was that what this zoning allows is appropriate and contextual for this neighborhood. You tell me if it looks that way to you. And here, unfortunately, not much different is the actual architectural renderings of what is going to be built there. And it's actually under construction right now. So, as I mentioned, the zoning really doesn't do a good job of protecting the neighborhood. So we came together with a zoning plan that would do something very different. Basically put in place contextual zoning in place of the zoning that was there. If you look in the two columns on the right-hand side, you really see sort of the heart of what our proposed rezoning would do. It would put in place height limits of, for one zoning district, the denser one, a maximum of 120 feet with a 60 to 85 foot base. For the less dense zoning districts, a base of 80 feet with a 40 to 65 foot base, and we expressed a willingness to go with inclusionary zoning, which would incentivize the inclusion of affordable housing. We indicated to the administration that we would be happy to see the affordable housing component made mandatory, and that we'd be happy if it was even greater than the 20% that the current rules allow. So this is just sort of a close-up showing. These are just some examples of, so next door to this zoning district is another zoning district that had the same zoning, which we did get contextually rezoned in 2010, I believe. These are some examples of what was built in that zoning district before we got the zoning changed. This is a development site. You can see behind it the tall building sticking up built under the old zoning. This is what was built instead under the contextual zoning that we got, that we're trying to get for University Place, but which this administration adamantly refuses to do. What we see here are, up on top, are the examples of what the existing zoning allows and encourages. On the bottom is what the zoning we're trying to get would do, which, as you can see, is much more appropriate for the neighborhood. Same here. Same here. Now, in order to do this, we played by all the rules. We had a big community meeting that about 150 people came out to. We did an online survey afterwards. We got a more than 99% response rate of support for the proposed rezoning. We brought it to the community board, which is at the bottom again. 100 or more people turned out for it. The community board unanimously supported it. We got support from every elected official representing the area, from the borough president, city council member, our state legislators, every block association, civic group, co-op and condo in the neighborhood. Everybody was for this. You've never seen a less controversial issue in our neighborhood. This, by the way, illustrates what would be built on that Baltimore site under our zoning. As you can see, much more reasonable in scale, but actually the same number of square feet, or an even greater number of square feet, with at least 20% of them reserved for affordable housing. For the past 2 years, the administration has said nothing but no to us on this proposed rezoning. We had demonstrations on the site to try to pressure the administration, pointing out the amount of affordable housing that could be built, that wasn't being built because of the existing zoning. They continued to say no. They also, interestingly, refused to meet with us to discuss it until the city council member, Councilmember Mendez here, basically forced them to. And when they did, they provided us with entirely inaccurate information, saying, well, there really are no real development sites in the neighborhood. For instance, this building here, they said could never be developed because there were residents in the building. There are no residents in the building. The building has just been bought for $200 million, and it is going to be developed. Similarly, they said this building pictured here also could never be developed. Also, demolition permits have just been filed. 200-foot tall building going up there. And here, this was actually a building which was in the process of being developed, as they told us to our face that this site could never be developed. As many of you know, this old black billiard site is in the process of having a 200-foot tall building built on it right now. I'm going to wrap up there, but I'm looking forward to the Q&A where we can talk more about this. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jay Fong with the Coalition Protect Chinatown and Lower East Side. We're a coalition of community groups, elected officials, senior centers, small businesses, students, workers, and their families to fight against displacement and to take back control of our community. So we see it as not an affordable housing issue, but really a community issue. Our community is not a place where you just go to sleep at night. It's about schools, it's about services, it's about a comprehensive community that has been built over generations. And so we see rezoning as being traditionally used against us, but it can be a weapon to protect us against luxury development. And I'm specifically from Chinese Staff and Workers Association, and so we have a long history of fighting land use and community control, homesteading, building land trusts in the East Village, and in 1986 won a landmark lawsuit, a decision that people should be considered part of the environment, not just land, air, and water. And in the last decade, we have organized thousands of residents and workers and community members to demand greater control and decision-making in our own community. So the coalition grew out of a proposed East Village rezoning plan that protected and gave really good protection to the East Village, but accelerated the development of Chinatown and the Lower East Side, all the areas that were excluded, as you can see outside of that red line. The majority of the areas excluded. The majority of the areas excluded from protection, as you can see, are about 70% people of color and majority low-income families. And hundreds of people attended public meetings throughout the beginning of the ULIP process to the end. Dozens of people testified to demand inclusion in the plan. We delivered over 10,000 signed petitions of residents and concerned community members demanding to include the entire CP3 area in the rezoning. And our community, as one of the last working class people of color communities in Manhattan, we thought that if the East Village with its special characteristics should be preserved and protected, wasn't Chinatown and Lower East Side just as special and valued need to be preserved and protected? They said, the city told us yes, but let them go first, you later. So because of the overwhelming public outcry and the hundreds of people protesting, the city was forced to acknowledge that Chinatown needed protection, but they created a separate Chinatown working group. And from the beginning, the city wanted to fetishize Chinatown. They wanted to put up an archway, separate it from the Lower East Side, and continue a legacy of exclusion and further divide us instead of unite. In 2009, largely led by Latino and African American residents, there were protests demanding that CWG open up not only the process of the rezoning, but also the plan itself, and include the entire Lower East Side that was left out of the East Village rezoning, which was largely public housing. And eventually, CWG agreed to include the Lower East Side. But we didn't wait for the city to tell us how they wanted to rezone. In 2010, we partnered with Hunter College Center for Community Planning and Development to create a people first rezoning plan based on the special Clinton district. I don't know if you're familiar with it. We collected over another 10,000 petitions in support of this people first rezoning plan, and over 500 small businesses pledged support for the plan. And so this is I guess predecessor. These principles were eventually adopted by the Chinatown Working Group in a 197C rezoning plan to protect homes, workplaces, and businesses of the entire neighborhood. And also to provide equal protection for the entire neighborhood, which also means preserving public land and public assets, protecting the existing affordable housing stock, which was largely, again, public housing, protections for small businesses, 50% mandatory inclusionary housing, and that's according to the local AMI, and height caps, most importantly, that developers are not able to use FAR as of right, build these as of right buildings. And these principles were again adopted by the CWG and introduced into the 197C plan that was put together by Pratt, the urban planning experts that were working for CWG. So over the years, it's been a collaboration of 3 community boards 1, 2, and 3, developers, business owners, small proprietors, and over 50 community groups. But since Mayor de Blasio has been appointed, we've seen, as many of you other groups of neighborhoods have seen, he really is worse than Greenberg. Last summer, DCP called the plan too ambitious. They say in the Chinese community that, Bloomberg was a wolf. You know what you're going to get. But de Blasio is a fox, a ferocious fox. You don't know. He's talking out of 2 sides of his mouth. Last summer, DCP called the plan too ambitious and told members of our coalition we were asking for too much and they can only move on some parts of the plan, that the rest will have to wait. So these delay tactics, I think, are being used time and time again for people of color, poor people, from getting equal protection ever since Robert Moses. And it's really akin to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota right now, where there's been deliberate destruction of sacred burial grounds after the tribe submitted a request to halt the demolition. They're halting it temporarily for investigation, and it really seems like an attempt to cool off people's anger and dissuade them from coming together to fight. And it's also reminiscent of the civil rights era, when Black people were told to wait, that equality was an idea that its time has not come yet, and an attempt to quell the rising movement for equal rights. Chinatown right now is being described by the New York Times as an open prairie for developers. One example is 8385 Bowery tenants who are facing eviction right now. This building, like many others in the neighborhood, should be rent stabilized, but without height limits, the landlord is trying to use disrepair to vacate the building, tear it down, and build up as high as possible. NYCHA is also under threat of being privatized with the mayor's next generation NYCHA plan, which is even worse than Bloomberg's info plan. And it's not a coincidence that now NYCHA is delaying repairs, claiming the only way to repair is to sell to private interests like Citibank. And people are being pushed out or sick or dying by trying to stay in their homes. And as we see from recent renderings on the waterfront, Excel has opened the floodgates to luxury development. Right now, they're telling us to carve up this Chinatown Working Group into pieces, but it will only create more disparity in our community. These are statistics from a forthcoming book, but it kind of shows how, let me see now, the exclusion from contextual rezoning Since then, we have lost many affordable units, rents have skyrocketed, incomes have nearly doubled for whites, while incomes actually for Asians have decreased. Moreover, people of color are being pushed out in droves in our neighborhood, and it seems like Mayor de Blasio's plan to end the tale of two cities is really to destroy one of them. Our community is done waiting. Last fall, almost 1,000 Chinese, Latino, African American, white residents, small business owners, students, workers, concerned friends, some of you in this room, all united to march from the Extel site to City Hall to demand the adoption of the Chinatown Working Group Plan. This is one of the marches, one of them in the pouring rain, and also a town hall meeting attended by 700 people, which one reporter told me has not been so well attended since the Juliana era. The mayor's representative attended, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Are you willing to compromise?" And people were furious and said, "Compromise what? Our community has compromised time and time again." And there are many parts of this plan through the years that have been compromised out. But there is no compromise for equal protection. The compromise is to be unequal. And so last winter and spring, we joined, again, many of you in this room, to protest against the mayor's DQA and MIH zoning changes. And I don't have time to get into now, but I think affordable housing is just, it barely scratches the surface of the problem. But what have we learned from this? Our community has made amazing progress, so we did the impossible by coming together across ethnicity, despite linguistic cultural barriers, despite the fierce racism both externally and internally in our community, despite attacks from the city to divide us, and by so much money thrown by the mayor at nonprofits to calm people down, to tell them, don't yell so much, don't be so angry. But we have been able to force the issue open and really allow room for people in our community, immigrant, non-English speaking, poor people that are often regarded as victims, to really take charge of their fate and create an actual rezoning plan that will protect our entire neighborhood. So now, I'm going to end with longtime criminal Sheldon Silver behind bars. And the mayor is under federal investigation. I think this is an unprecedented opportunity for our community, for our entire city, to have this fighting chance, to take this fighting chance. And so we look forward to working with other people in other neighborhoods to take back control of our community. I didn't have a slide with my contact information, but maybe we can go to the question and answer.
So I'm just going to cue up the Harlem Now presentation, and sorry if you know what it is, background and microphone added to speed on the half of City Harlem Now. And then we will be ready for questions and answers. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Introducing Save Harlem Now, I'd just like to start by saying we live in interesting times. The mayor is so cynical that when he says affordable housing, it's code that means more luxury condos and gentrification. On the national scene, there looms something that's even more potentially troubling than this gentrification. And that is the specter of Donald Trump, akin to fascism. And this is terribly problematic because how, given what we face, are we able to talk about things that seem trivial by comparison, like zoning or preservation? One thing that we should talk about when we talk about these things is that black and brown lives matter. And so do black and brown men. racism, because of elitism, only 3.6% of the buildings protected by landmarking in Harlem. There are only 3.6% of the buildings in Harlem are protected by landmarking, compared to Greenwich Village, where not enough buildings are landmarked, but about 2/3 of them. And when you look at the aftermath of Intro 775, you see that even under the most favorable circumstances, that in a community like Harlem or Inwood or East Harlem or Chinatown, that we will never catch up with the Village or the west side of Park Slope in terms of landmarking. It just isn't possible. I'm not suggesting either defeat or retreat. What I'm speaking about instead is, I'm not even speaking for Safe Harlem right now. I'm speaking for myself, but I will speak for Safe Harlem in just a minute. Indeed, to the contrary, I'm suggesting that with our current mayor and a prospective President Trump, that it is impossible to act until we have changed the situation to make zoning and preservation possible, which right now they're just not. They're not. Imagine our city council voted overwhelmingly for the mayor's rezoning. Overwhelmingly. You know, back when the charter was challenged because the New York City Council did not reflect the neighborhoods of the city. You know, almost all the city council members were white. But now that you have a city council that looks more like the city, it is no different. They have given in to the same development forces as their predecessors. So we've really got to change that in order to be able to work on these other issues in the long term. Now, in terms of acting in the short term, it seems to me that what we need to do is to have more solidarity. We need to emulate those preservationists in Inwood who didn't even know, those preservationists in Inwood who didn't even realize they were preservationists, because they looked right over the wonderful Kahn building, which is a Packard showroom and is the most beautiful Kahn building to survive in New York City. And here's this great architect of national repute, and yet just overlooked. Why? Because it was in Inwood. And we must emulate them in neighborhood by neighborhood. We've got to be able to go and to replicate the success they had there by taking to the streets and acting in a proactive, determined, focused way. In terms of Safe Harlem Now, the thing, you'll see Valerie will talk about our mapping project and these other things, which to me, right now, you know, I just look at them and I say, well, by the time they're done, there won't be anything in Harlem left. But in the short term, what we're going to try to get to happen is that we are urging you to join us in the spring when we have our Historic Houses of Worship conference, where we get together leaders from houses of worship, clergy, and political leaders and cultural leaders, and we want all of you to join us in trying to strategize to find means of assisting houses of worship so they don't feel that the only recourse they have to save themselves is by selling themselves to a developer who will demolish the house of worship and put them in a little corner in the ground floor and then build a luxury condominium. And we hope to do that, and we hope to have you join us. We also are in favor of having a program passed that will be something akin to what happened with the theater district, where development rights will be able to be transferred in a community-wide basis for historic churches, so that they will be able to derive some kind of revenue that will be serious restricted to mostly to either funding maintenance or restoration. And then we also are in favor of the landmarks preservation law being changed so that we can have buildings which have been determined to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places be automatically calendared as city landmarks triggered by a permit at any time being applied for.
Thank you, Michael, and now I have 3 minutes left. Safe Harlem Now. But I am the president of Safe Harlem Now, and we are a newly formed historic preservation advocacy organization. Safe Harlem Now is dedicated to taking critical, immediate, and effective action to protect, preserve, and celebrate Harlem's irreplaceable built heritage. Since our formation, almost 18 months ago, we have obtained our 501c3 not-for-profit tax exemption, thanks to the critical and early financial support we received from Landmark West, our preservation partner on the Upper West Side. Our goals are to advocate, collaborate, support, and assist and educate. As advocates, we organized a show of community support and testified before the Landmarks Preservation Commission in support of the long overdue extension of the Mount Morris Historic District, which was designated a year ago. We also testified in support of 6 buildings in Harlem remaining on the LPC backlog calendar, and we were successful in helping keep 4 out of the 6 buildings in Harlem on the calendar. We also testified before the City Council to oppose the passage of Intro 775 for all the good that did. But anyway, we have and will continue to collaborate with others to advance the preservation and protection goals of Safe Harlem Now. To that end, we have met with 2 community boards and are working on initiatives that came out of those meetings that I will discuss later on in my presentation. The major reason we organized is in response to inappropriate real estate development, which replaced neglect as Harlem's greatest threat. These are the threats we face now. Out-of-scale real estate developments, churches in peril because they are either closing or sold or are demolished. Lack of contextual zoning and landmark designations and upzoning, such as the city zoning for Quality and Affordability, CQA plan. As you can see on this PowerPoint, next one. Okay. Harlem lags substantially behind other Manhattan neighborhoods in protecting its historically and architecturally significant buildings. Since 1965, Harlem has suffered inappropriate upzoning. A brownstone area like Harlem should be zoned for R6, yet it's all over the place, R7, R8. Look at this map of slides of Park Slope and other brownstone areas in Brooklyn, a big difference. In 2007, Frederick Douglass Boulevard at 114th Street looked like this. Without landmarking and contextual zoning, Frederick Douglass at 114th Street looks like this today. What a difference some years make, from a sweet brownstone block in 2007 to this out-of-scale development on West 111th Street near Central Park. Should as-of-right zoning allow out-of-scale development? This new construction is across the street from Morningside Park, which is one of 4 historic Harlem parks. Community Board 9 is concerned about the threat to houses of worship in Harlem. All Saints Roman Catholic Church is an imposing, ornate Venetian Gothic building that was designed by James Greenberg, who also designed St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It was closed by the diocese and will be sold. The question is, to whom and for what will it be used? The members of Mount Calvary United Methodist Church merged with St. Mark's United Methodist Church, pictured here. Mount Calvary will be sold, and we wonder how long St. Mark's can hold on as it grapples with a dwindling congregation. Child's Memorial Faith Temple, Church of God in Christ, was the site where Malcolm X was eulogized after being murdered further uptown. Child's Memorial was the only church that was brave enough to open its doors to allow the venerable leader to be remembered in dignity. This church faced the wrecking ball earlier this year and was sold to a private developer. There are numerous other examples of Harlem's houses of worship that are threatened. We are planning a community-wide forum, which Michael talked about, and I hope that you will be there to support us in this effort. Community Board 10 prepared a comprehensive historic preservation plan in 2012, which, according to the LPC, was used as a resource when it was considering designating the Mount Morris Historic District. In partnership with the Landmarks Committee of Community Board 10, Save Harlem Now conducted a bus tour of sites identified. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. Sorry. Anyway, Safe Harlem Now conducted a bus tour of sites identified in the plan for senior staff of the LPC. This tour was the first step in our effort to increase landmark protections in the Board 10 area. We have been asked to prioritize what LPC might look at first. Last but not least, and I've got the right. Last but not least, we recently were awarded a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation to create to create an interactive web-based map of historic resources in Harlem that can be used as a preservation planning tool. Initially, the map's boundaries will include from 110th Street to 165th Street, river to river. The map will be structured to show different layers of information, including sites under threat due to their potential for real estate development, churches in peril, areas with inappropriate zoning, as well as Safe Harlem Now's wish list and our watch list. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Adrian Untermeyer, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Historic Districts Council. Thank you all for being here this evening. I think the last time I was here, I was taking my nonprofit law final, so I think this has been a bit better of an experience. So please just give all of our wonderful panelists a round of applause. We are entering the question and answer portion, and we are already out of time. So please do keep them brief. But what I would like to say before we proceed to the questions and the answers, it is no secret that we as preservationists have tangled with NYU over the years a bit. That said, the educators of the institution have always stood with us, and I think that tonight's event is a testament to that. So if we could all please give a warm round of applause. Design program. Just a brief word about the Historic Districts Council. We represent over 500 community groups like all of you across the city, and so we do a tremendous amount of listening. And events like these are wonderful. We're so glad that everybody came here tonight. We just have a brief show of hands for all of our directors and advisors in the room. There are a lot of them. If you could just raise your hands, I see some back there. We've got a lot of people around, so please speak with them afterwards. If you're looking to get our help, any sort of matter, please come speak with us. We would love to extend a hand of friendship and help. So without any further ado, we're going to turn it over to questions and answers from the crowd. Again, please do be brief. And Harry will call on you throughout the evening. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks again. Sorry for the crowded panel table. There's a lot of us to work on these issues. So, you in the back there.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for speaking so passionately about your communities today. My name is Grace, and I'm with an organization called the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which supports affordable housing development in New York City. One of the things that a lot of you mentioned in your presentations was that many churches and faith-based organizations are in danger of losing their space. As you've been doing your work, what are some of the ideas that you have thought of that, or gaps in services that you think really benefit faith-based organizations and help them find a way to stay in their communities? What's working and what needs to be done?
Michael, Sean, you touched upon that.
Well, the limited funding which the Landmarks Conservancy of New York has really is very helpful to, I know churches in Harlem benefited materially by having new roofs and all other infrastructure that's been replicated. The incredible restoration at the Ephesus Seventh-day Adventist Church, which was, had its steeple, which was lost in the 1970s. Replaced. I always said to people that, I knew it would be replaced someday, but that it was as unlikely as an African American becoming president. And within the same year, both things happened. Paige Crawley, she was involved with that. And so there are those small, discrete things, but really something far more dramatic has to happen, and that's why it occurred to me that this thing that happened in the theater district where theaters were able to disperse their development rights over a broad area and get revenue in that way. But that will take the city council, and that will take the clergy being behind it, and that's what we're hoping to be able to try to do. Not just for Harlem, but citywide, because it's a big problem. I mean, it's also a worrisome problem because, as you had pointed out earlier, what has happened where development rights have been collected in different places, it's been very troubling, some of the towers have resolved. But I think that it can be worked out to be a win-win.
Sean, since you touched on your presentation, anything further than that?
Very quickly, I think there's two issues. One is that the Landmarks Commission is a little bit slow or concerned about landmarking religious properties. For the most part, they've been a little bit slower than a lot of other buildings and building topologies. But the other half is the benefits that are written to the zoning law. A lot of these churches and religious organizations by now have paid off their mortgages. So it's a cash windfall if a developer comes in and says, I'm going to give you an endowment and I'll give you a brand new space in perpetuity for $1 a year or whatever it is. Because the way the zoning is written, the developer gets a 20% bonus. So we've written the rules in such a way that because the Landmarks Commission doesn't give it the second look that maybe it wants, or the more restrained in evaluating it on its merit, this is the lower hanging fruit. These are the carve-outs often from districts, and usually if a religious organization claims hardship, they get it. We've had buildings that were landmarked, like Mount Nebo in the Upper West Side, get torn down and become condos. And we're seeing it right now. There's 3 synagogues right now that are being flipped, essentially, in the Upper West Side, and that's just one community. So it's the lower hanging fruit. Maybe 20% is too much of a community bonus. But we also talked to Manhattan Borough President about this, and there's really very few guidelines on what a community facility is. There's no citywide register of where these are. There's no monitoring If Deck gets a community facility space and then they fold, the developer has no responsibility under the law to list that space. They can charge a rent for that space to anyone else. They can have it vacant in perpetuity. The bulk is there on the community, but the community is not reaping any benefit. The community facility rule, we believe, was written in such a way to encourage new community uses, not to rape and pillage the existing ones.
Can I follow up? Will you, as preservationists, try to put some pressure on so-called community facilities so that they don't remove community, like NYU is removing our grocery store? That kind of thing should really be on the top of the list. We are a neighborhood of people who eat.
As an example, certainly over the years, we've been working with other community groups actually to reform the zoning system in relation to community facilities. We've actually succeeded in getting a significant portion of our neighborhood zoned in such a way so that the bonus that Sean was just describing no longer exists. We've tried to get the rules rewritten so things that don't actually really serve communities don't get the bonus where it does exist. We've helped to get some modest changes. For instance, a few years ago, faculty housing was recategorized so that it's no longer considered a community facility, so universities don't get a bulk bonus for building faculty housing. It's basically housing. It should be treated as housing. There's a lot of other things that we would have moved out of there as well. But that's really an ongoing battle. It's certainly one that's on the radar for a lot of community and preservation groups.
You, sir.
Howard Bureau. The last two groups especially highlighted the purely political nature of what we're doing. Of course, we're in administrative and legal tangles, but we're also in a purely political situation. I'm well aware that there are 501c3, C4, and many other complications and hurdles that we would have to deal with. But I'm urging the preservation community to become involved politically in the next election next year. De Blasio, who is no friend of this movement, can be removed, especially in the Democratic primary. Very, very few people vote. And a movement of interest group like I'm a preservation voter can make a difference. So despite the complications, I'm urging that our community consider which candidates may be friendlier. I'm not talking about a friend of preservation. I don't think that's realistic.
So
we have to consider who might be friendlier than the current administration and seek to oust the incumbent in the Democratic primary because the mayor of the city of New York is the #1 player in these games.
Okay, politics are very important to all of these issues. And speaking of politics, I want to ask Jay Fong, where is the plan right now? We've heard people are told to scale back their plans. We heard about the de Blasio dying on the Upper West Side. You know, LPC and State Harlem Now is asking them to prioritize. And so where are things with you all?
So right now, University, which is a member of the they're going to go back and reaffirm their recommendation in the past of their adoption of the plan, but it's really up to the city at this point. And I believe Mr. Adams, did you read that article? You wrote that article in the New York Times that got in the op-ed.
Oh, yes.
I got a response from de Blasio, which was just appalling. And so I think we've seen from this administration that really, they're going to use all these tactics to kind of delay. Right now, they're asking us to pick parts of the plan and go back to just the Chinatown, consider the traditional Chinatown part. And I think, they're trying to essentialize it, put an archway, make it kind of a tourist trap, really take out the part of the community, which, is very much tied to the Lower East Side. So that's where we're at right now. There's, if you want technical, technicalities of the plan, there are 5 different main sub areas of the plan. But right now they're asking us to choose, which part goes first, which part goes second. And that's exactly the problem. Is we can't, continue to divide pride of our community. And so, yeah, that's where it's at right now.
One of the problems for us is when you're asked to prioritize, that's difficult because every site that we've shown and then didn't show are important because we're so far behind the 8 ball that, as Michael says, we could probably never catch up with these new rules and regulations. So, what do you do when you're asked to prioritize? And then what will you get even after you prioritize?
It really is like a Sophie's choice. I mean, or the judgment of Solomon. I mean, do you want to take your baby and cut it in half? No, nobody wants to do that.
And then Maggie, you all in Inwood and Northern Manhattan were faced with something like yay or nay, and you vociferously organized against something. You want to share a little bit about that and touch upon what we just said?
Yeah, I'll do the latter first. To answer the questioner, in order to be getting involved politically, we need to be together somehow. Now, we're together right now physically, but we're not organized together. You saw a whole bunch of presentations that had an awful lot of commonality. You know, there are a lot of us that are facing a lot of the same issues. A lot of us have done some things that were successful, that we could learn from one another. But it's only a fraction of the movement that's here in this room. And there are 4 other boroughs. So we need to be making a big organization first in order to be then taking the next step to be trying to do the political work. So I was hoping that tonight that somehow through this we'd be able to start doing that. I'm still not sure how that could happen, except I'm hoping that all of our presentations at least will be online with our contact information. Perhaps this organization could go further, or another one, to organizing something like this. But do you want to answer the question?
Can I just say something about engaging with politicians and saying nay? Yeah, we said nay. And what we said nay to is, you know, they thought that they could use the as of right. Well, you're going to get an as of right, 100% building. You could have 50. So they thought they were giving us a great deal. It was a bad deal. It was a horrible deal. We recognize that. And we're not done with Sherman Plaza. We're going to fight. If they try to put up an as of right, we're going to fight the as of right too. And what I learned is that the way to deal with politicians is to show them normal. And that's the only way to do it. And that's what we did. And you know, I think Adonis Rodriguez took a brave stance in the end because I know he was under a tremendous amount of political pressure from the de Blasio administration. De Blasio does not care about our neighborhoods. He cares about his political career.
Yes.
All right, and he wants a certain arbitrary number that he can tote and tell, and we're going to pay the price for it. And he doesn't. I say let's displace de Blasio. Let's do
let's take another, or do I just add?
I just want to say we will make sure that all the presentations and contact information are placed online for everyone to see.
Yes. A question, sir?
Yes, I'm a student and young community organizer. I'm organizing in Flushing, which is a neighborhood that had gone through the rezoning process but was axed by the councilman. We had the A&E Church sell their parking lot to the developer. Even though the rezoning was axed, we still have developers buying up rent-stabilized buildings. What I wanted to ask was, how are these groups that I'm looking at building solidarity and power for tenants? How are we changing the relationship between the developer, the landlord, and those that are actually being displaced?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we've been working on, and Harry deserves a real hand for spearheading putting this together tonight, as we're working on for us, is trying to build as many connections as possible between preservation community groups and tenant and affordable housing groups, because there really is this concerted push and this kind of like Faustian alliance that's formed between the real estate industry and those who claim to be advocating for affordable housing. The fact of the matter is that the approach approach that this administration is touting, which is to massively upzone, to massively increase the amount of market rate housing that can be built, and to say that that's the price that you have to pay to get a much smaller amount of affordable housing in return, is not going to make our city more affordable. It will, at best, create a small number of affordable units. It will create a tsunami of luxury market rate units, which will have the impact of driving out much more quickly the existing affordable housing that we have. So I don't have a silver bullet to offer, but I will say it's certainly a top priority for us to show how the concerns and efforts of preservation groups and of tenant and affordable housing groups are certainly, I think, very much in sync.
And Rachel, your slideshow had the striking number of the loss of that stabilized units in the Upper East Side. Do you have any points for that question?
Sure, I mean, I think that it's, that continuing to build solidarity among all of our community groups, having events like this where we can come together, share ideas, and, having beyond just a panel, but like working sessions where we can come together, talk about what's happening in our neighborhoods, how we can all kind of come together to fight a common problem.
But what I don't understand is, given that in 1943 there was a lesser shortage of affordable housing and affordable commercial spaces for rent, and President Roosevelt came up with rent control, why are we not demanding that? Because being pushed out and gentrification is impacting every single person in this room, from the richest to the poorest. And so, sure, we ought to be able to unite behind that somehow to get a change. And the thing that, of course, has been so frustrating for me is all we've heard edging towards that from Bernie Sanders and from Hillary Clinton, and yet no one has really talked about that as a means of getting rid of this problem which exists all over the country.
There was a question in the back there.
Yes, this is a question for all the panelists. I wanted to get your opinion on something that came to my attention yesterday in a phone call. The background is it was a call with a group called the Neighborhood Preservation Ballot Initiative in Los Angeles. And they are doing a ballot initiative that's quite substantive. So I guess here it would be the equivalent of a referendum. They're out collecting signatures. They have a 4-month window, I think, to do it. And it's going on the ballot in the next election cycle. And it's all about neighborhood preservation, downzoning, height limits. They have, a whole wish list that's going to be on the ballot in LA. And they're out on the streets, signatures, hundreds of people. Would such a thing work in New York? It's for all of you.
Well, the law is structured very differently in California than it is in New York in terms of ballot initiatives. We actually don't have that in New York. We can do charter revisions, but the mayor basically has the power to bump any citizen-initiated charter revision by putting his own charter revision proposal on the ballot, and that's what Mayor Bloomberg did for much of his term. He prevented there being any community-initiated charter revision proposals on the ballot, because every time there was a move to put one on there, he put one on there instead, which meant that the other one couldn't be there. There may be others in this room and certainly elsewhere that know more about the process than I do, but if I'm not mistaken, the way our laws are structured here in New York as opposed to California, it's much harder to do, and there are many fewer circumstances